Today we're continuing our new series. I've entitled our new series, Stages of Faith Development. I think we can all recognize that some people appear to be more mature in their understanding and their capacity to live the Christian faith than others. But there's actually been sociological research that's been done over the years, and I want to share some of that with you that I think is helpful and insightful. We're going to talk about the chaos phase of faith development today. There are 4 stages of faith that we're going to delineate. The first one is chaos. The second stage is conformity. And third stage is questioning. And the final stage of maturity is conviction faith. Now, I think we can all recognize this in children, or maybe even thinking back to our own childhood. If you grew up in a religious family that was active in a church fellowship, you as a child didn't decide whether you went or not. That decision was made by someone else. You were along for the ride. And you were at the beginning stage of faith development, so you were in the chaos phase. But people that are in the chaos phase can, for periods of time, when they're around faith people who believe certain things and do certain things, they can temporarily conform themselves to whatever the expectations of the group they're part of. But just like when church was over and the kids were outside, we were like running amok when I was a kid growing up. And outside of church, if groups got together, all kinds of nonsense went on. So the point being that everybody, especially young people and children that go to church, aren't necessarily committed to live those values in their life. And that's the chaos phase. If one continues to grow, one goes through a conformity phase, learning to live these principles. And if you continue to grow, you go through a questioning phase where you ask more and difficult questions about faith. And finally, you get to deep conviction faith, where you are not motivated by external conformity, but you're motivated inwardly by the deep convictions that you hold. So, let's define briefly the chaos phase. In the chaos phase, one is directed by one's own desires and perceived self-interest. A faith commitment is seen as an unwanted set of values that limits one's freedom and personal happiness. So if you're at the chaos phase, you recognize people around you are committed to sets of values and beliefs and live certain ways. And you kind of respect that in the sense that if you're around them, you kind of go along with the program. But you don't view that as something you want, because that's going to limit your own freedom. And it's the belief of the chaos phase folks that becoming religious people takes all the fun out of life. I mean, all they're trying to do is live it up and have a nice time. And it's these religious people that want to pour cold water on all the fun. So from a chaos perspective, one respects but keeps one distanced and doesn't commit oneself to any particular faith, perspective, set of values. And, of course, you believe this is all in your self-interest. In other words, why commit myself to some other set of values when I can do what I want to do, when I want to do it, and how I want to do it? Don't I know what will make me happy? Can I make decisions for myself? And so, as the chaos phase, people look at faith commitments as a restrictive, constraining, and unhelpful addition. We're going to look at some biblical examples this week and next week about people in the Bible that are in the chaos phase and discuss it in a little more depth. Not surprisingly, we find it at the very beginning of the Bible. We look at the first family in the Bible of Adam and Eve. We're in chapter 4, verse 1 and 2. Adam made love to his wife, Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, "With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man." Later, she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now, Abel kept flocks, and Cain worked the soil. So here we had the first family. They had experienced a great disappointment because of their decisions about eating from the fruit of the tree that God told them not to. They couldn't obey God in just one prohibition. That's just something they had to violate. As a result of that, they were kicked out of the garden and did not have direct access to God. But that was not the end of the story, because it appears they began to come to that edge of the garden where the cherubim was guarding entry to the garden, and there they would come and offer sacrifices to God. Now the two sons, notice the firstborn is Cain, and he's a tiller of the soil. And then his brother Abel is one who tends animals. So they were very different in their pursuits. If you think about it, the first child in a family oftentimes has high expectations put on them by their parents. Oftentimes, the first child sees himself as needing to be the hero of the family, the one that takes the family values and moves ahead with them, the one that's looked to. And in the ancient world, in the context of Cain and Abel, the firstborn was to become the patriarch of the family and have responsibility for the overall family once his father died. And so Eve is very excited about this child. She's conceived a man, and perhaps she thinks he's going to be the man that undoes the curse of the garden. But that's not what's going to happen. And then we see sacrifices were expected. Verse 3 through 5. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions, from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry, and his face was downcast. Now, some people go to elaborate means to try to explain why Cain's sacrifice wasn't acceptable, because it wasn't an animal sacrifice, and that's what faith sacrifices demand. But I think it's just better to stick with the context and see what the context said rather than extrapolate something greater. I think the difference between Cain and Abel is significant. Cain, of course, worked the soil, so you'd expect him to bring a gift from the soil. Abel had animals. You expect him to offer an animal sacrifice. The difference is who offered the best. Abel, what did he do? He brought portions of some of the firstborn of his flock, the fatty portions, which were considered the very best. And later on, in sacrifices were often the part offered up to God in sacrifice. Later on, the law of Moses. So here we have Abel giving some of the best of what he has in his sacrifice. And in contrast to that, we have Cain offering some fruit. Just some fruit. Not the first fruit, just some fruit. So you get the idea. It's time the family is expected to go and make their sacrificial offerings. And Cain looks around and says, well, what leftovers have I got? Well, I got a couple things here I don't really want to eat. They're not really in the best of shape anymore. Well, I'll just go offer them to God. So he shows up and gives them some fruit. But God didn't look with favor because Cain, although he was the first, was not becoming the best, but instead was abusing his position and giving God leftovers. And therefore, God was not favorable towards his offering. And so whose fault was that? Well, that was Cain's. But notice Cain's attitude was, oh, I'm very sorry, God, maybe I should go back and reconsider the sacrifice that I offer to you, and let's get this thing right. But when you're in the chaos phase, you don't like people telling you what to do, even if it's God. And so he was not just angry, but very angry. And it says his face was downcast. The idea he couldn't look you in the eye. He's looking down. He's angry and he's ashamed. He feels like God has unfairly not accepted his sacrifice and shown favor on his brother and his sacrifice. And this is something that was done in a public way. And so, no doubt, Adam and Eve are there. And so, in a public way, he feels like God has shamed him by not accepting his sacrifice. And he's angry at God, and he feels ashamed because he feels like God has shamed him in the presence of the others that are there. So Cain's not in a good place. But God offers some counseling. Chapter 4, verse 6. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast?" Good therapists do what? They'll start telling you stuff. They ask you questions. The questions are designed to get you to be introspective and to think about why you're where you are. So here is Cain, very angry, with looking down, feeling kind of ashamed, and the Lord comes to him and says, "Why are you angry?" You know, this isn't something that you need to get angry about. This is something that can be remedied. You just need to repent and decide from this point on to give God your best, not your leftovers. But notice, God asked two questions in a row. And I think the point of that is Cain wasn't answering the Lord's question. Why are you angry? Sullen silence. So God's going a step further, saying, look, I can see it in you, that your face is downcast. So I know you're upset. You're not fooling anybody, Cain. Why are you in this condition? God's second question was met again with sullen silence. Now, you can bring somebody in for counseling, and if their response to the counseling is, you ask them questions, they just sit there and go, I don't know. I've had parents bring in teenagers as if I was going to be able to talk with them a little bit and fix what was going wrong there. And I got the usual teenage thing. Well, what's the problem? I don't know. Well, has anything been going on that's bothering to you? I don't know. Do you know your name? No, I don't know. Do you exist at this moment? I don't know. So again, if a person isn't ready and willing, has an open heart, wants to do the right thing, instead of do their own thing, all the counseling in the world won't help. God was a perfect counselor, and his counseling didn't succeed. But he tried, but he couldn't get Cain to be responsive. Then we see the nature of sin. Very next verse. God tries to explain, okay, if you won't talk to me, let me ask further questions, but also try to explain your situation. If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? This word accepted, the Hebrew means have your face lifted up. You're downcast, feeling ashamed, and if you do the right thing, your face will be lifted up so you can look God in the eyes, look others in your eyes. Will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin, first appearance of the word sin in the Bible, is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. So he warns Cain that there's a powerful force for evil in the world, which he calls sin. We could also call it Satan. And that this force for evil wants you to do the wrong thing, but when you do, it's like a wild animal, a predator, that's just right at the door of your house, just waiting for you to come out, and it's going to pounce on you. For what purpose? Well, sin wants, desires to control you, manipulate you to its own ends, to enslave you and control you. But you must rule over it. Remember at the beginning chapter of Genesis, one of the things God said is he wanted those made in his image to rule over his creation. But here he's warning them, if you don't watch it, this force of evil will dominate and rule and control you. And you may think that by sinning and doing your own thing, doing whatever you want to do, that's going to bring you happiness. But what it instead is going to bring is a powerful force of evil to become indwelling in your life and begin to control you against your own will. Notice verse 8. Now Cain said to his brother, see, God asked all those questions, and Cain didn't have anything to say to God. But now he turns to his brother Abel and says, let's go out to the field. And while they're in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Attacked him and killed him. Anger, in this case, leads to murder. When you hate someone's guts and you don't think there are going to be any consequences if you act on that, one way to solve the problem is kill the person you hate. Fratricide, we call this, killing family. Unfortunately, there's a great deal of that in every culture throughout time. But here, we see Cain was unwilling to respond to God and then had a plan for his brother, the Abel solution. And he seems to, again, be a little bit immature. He's kind of walking Abel away from where the presence of God is near the garden. I'm going to get Abel out here in the field. Nobody's going to be able to see me. And out where nobody can see me, I'm going to kill him. And then I'm going to be done with him. So that's what he does. You see, we think, oh, being angry, that's no big deal. Well, you stoke enough anger, you feel ashamed, and you don't resolve these things in a constructive way, eventually they lead to other problems, other sins. In this case, Cain was angry at God, but he took it out on his brother. Brother didn't do anything to him. His brother just brought a good sacrifice to God. But Cain can't kill God, but he can sure kill his brother. This is chaos. It begins with half-hearted attitude towards worshiping, honoring God. doing that. And we strike out at others, act out, verbally or physically. Because when you're in the chaos phase, if you think somebody's looking down on you and shaming you, you feel like you can take it in your own hands and solve it. I'll just beat them up. Maybe in the process, I end up killing them. Oh, well, not my problem. They shouldn't have been treating me the way they did. But the bottom line is, God's saying, you know, the soil's not going to be responsive to you, not going to yield its crop. You're going to be forced to wander across the face of the earth. And human beings have been wandering ever since. Some of you have wandered into this country. I wandered up here from Texas. We're constantly wandering all over the place. But the real wandering is not so much physically, geographically, although a lot of people do seek what I call geographic salvation. If only I lived I'd be happy. If only we lived there, now that's a place I'd be happy. But geography is not going to make you happy or save you. You can either be contented where you are or discontented some idyllic place you would imagine you might be happy. But wandering to find salvation in places, people, and things will always let us down. And then he continues, the fear motivation, not faith. Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is more than I can bear. A little bit of the poor, pitiful me's. Today you're driving me out from the land, and I will be hidden from your presence. I'll be a restless wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me. Well, what would make Cain feel like somebody might kill him? He's projecting onto others the thing he did himself. So when you start becoming easily angered, you become a violent person, you become a liar, you assume everybody else is doing the same thing. And so you're paranoid about what other people are going to do to you. So one of the consequences of sin is it destroys our family, destroys us, and leads us driven by various fears. Fears others are going to find out my particular sinful behavior. That I'm going to be shamed in some sort of way. And so we're left wandering away from the presence of God, and instead of repenting, we're feeling sorry for ourselves. Oh, woe is me. It's just too hard for me to suffer the consequences for my chosen sinful behavior. This is just too much. I can't handle it. Poor, pitiful me. So we have an example of one of the first classic characters that's caught in chaos. When you live at that phase, you're acting off of your own self-interest. That can cause a lot of harm to other people. And even harms yourself. You see, the problem with thinking, if I just do what I want to do and seek my self-interest, things are all going to work out. Well, the problem with that is that you're not wise enough to know necessarily what's best for you, even in the short run, much less the long run. That's why we seek the advice of God, so we know for sure what the long-range implications are and can do the right thing. And notice that right off the bat, we're told that sin desires for you It wants to control you, but you can rule over it. You don't have to be ruled by sin. If you make a decision early enough, you won't get controlled by sin. Now, Paul picks up with this very idea and calls it slaves of sin. Romans 7, verse 14. We know that the law is spiritual, but I'm unspiritual, sold as a slave to sin. So there's nothing wrong with the Bible, nothing wrong with the Word of God, nothing wrong with the law of God, but the problem is me. I have become a slave of sin. You see, once you begin to act out on your selfish self-interest, eventually you let sin in, and instead of it bringing you all the happiness you thought that doing your own thing would do, it's bringing you misery. And you begin to realize you're not really even in control of your own self. Sin controls us. Verse 15 through 17, same chapter. I don't understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do, but what I hate, I do. And if I do what I do not want to do, I agree that the law is good. As it is, it's no longer I myself who do it, but it is sin living in me. You ever decided that you're going to quit a bad behavior? That's not good for me. I'm going to stop this. How does that go? I'm going to have to give up eating ice cream. That's not good for me. So I do away with the ice cream, and then I'm driving down the road a week later, and in my mind is what? Boy, you know that ice cream would sure taste good right now. Oh, but it's not good for me. I'm not going to stop. Get thee behind me, Wawa. I won't stop. I'm not going to get any ice cream. But the question becomes, if I don't do what I want to do, which is in sync with what's good for me, what in the world's going on? It's sin living in me. You see, you can lose control over your own personal life. Slavery to sin. One form of that we see in our society is addiction. People are addicted to food, people are addicted to alcohol, people are addicted to drugs. A lot of different things people are addicted to. And the problem with addiction is once you're addicted, you can't stop it. You can slow it down for a while. You can make some inroads for a little while, but you're going to be right back at it again. There are countless AA groups and NA groups and other kind of groups all over the country offering an opportunity for people to try to deal with a bad addiction that's destroying their life, destroying their family. And you know what AA and all these are? Spiritual growth groups. Spiritual growth group. Go read what the various rules are. It's all about a spiritual coming to God and asking Him to intervene. Why? Because they found that if you don't do that, your addiction controls you rather than you controlling what you do. We experience conflicted chaos looking at verse 18 and 19. For I know that good itself does not dwell in me, that is, in my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing. So you don't discover that sin's in control of your life until you decide to put the brakes on. You say, I'm going to stop this. And as long as you're just going along with it, no problem. Well, problem because this addiction is hurting you and others, but you don't feel like you can't quit. Every alcoholic believes they can quit until they try. And they can go for a while, and then they're right back at it again. Years ago, a young woman challenged me to give up the bad habit of drinking. I ended up marrying her. And I told her at the time, I can take it or leave it. No big deal. Well, she says, why don't you try stopping it altogether and see how that goes? I said, well, all right. I can do that if I want to. I don't really want to do that, but I can do that. And so I quit for several weeks, maybe a month. And then I found myself thinking a lot about it. Every time I get under stress or something, I think, boy, a drink would sure be nice. And I found myself tormented with this. Now, this happened when I was an older teenager, 19 years of age. So I had been addicted long. But for the next 10 years, I didn't drink any alcohol. But periodically, when I'd be under stress, I'd think, oh, well, boy, a drink would be good right now. I was tempted to pull in a liquor store and get a little something. So even though I was able, with God's help, to break that addiction, 10 years later, out of the blue, when I'd be under stress, here would it come back again, trying to get me to come back and join the party and get some, just relax you a little. But thanks God I didn't, and it's been a long time, and that doesn't tempt me or interest me now. But it scares me when I look back. And what if I hadn't have been dating a young woman that was spiritual minded and challenged me at a very early age? I mean, I was, like I said, about 19 years old. I didn't exactly have a long career of drinking. But already I was addicted. Thank be to God that she intervened, and with God's help, I was able to stop something that I'm sure would have caused me and other people countless heartaches over the years. That's what it means to be a slave to sin. The good I want to do, I don't do. Instead, I find myself doing the evil. What in the world's going on? Verse 20 tells the bottom line. We become possessed. You know, talk about demon possession? Well, there's sin possession. Sin possesses you. Verse 20. Now, if I do what I do not want to do, it's no longer I who do it, but it is sin living in me that does it. Now, Paul's not giving an excuse for this bad behavior, but he's just explaining the fact that sin is not some external set of rules and regulations out here you might violate or not, but sin is a powerful, personal source of evil that if you decide to do sinful and bad behavior, it will eventually come into your life and control and dominate you. And then at that point, if you decide, whoa, I better stop this, I'm not going to do that anymore, you can't stop. It drives you. It's in control. It's in the driver's seat. You know, you could be in a car, but if you're not in the driver's seat, you don't get to determine where the car goes. We're in the car, we're in our body, but if we've let sin in, sin has got the steering wheel and the gas pedal, and sin doesn't like to use the brake very much. And you're off to the races. This is what Paul saw, what God predicted to Cain. Look, things are going to get worse, buddy. I'm telling you, you can still rule over it, but if you don't, it's going to rule over you. And of course, we see, unfortunately, Cain decided to continue on living in the chaos. And use the term chaos for this stage of faith development because you're not really headed in any one specific direction. You're just doing what you feel like doing. You lose jobs because you don't feel like doing them. You lose relationships because you don't feel like you have to be responsible to them. That's what chaos does. It creates chaos. Chaos in your life and other people's lives that you're involved with. That's what sin does when it enslaves you. Let's look at some of the characteristics of this chaos stage of lack of faith development. Let's look at one list, Galatians chapter 5. The acts of the flesh are obvious: sexual immorality, impurity, and debauchery. The acts of the flesh, the acts of your sinful nature, just acting out on your own desire, just following your desire wherever it leads you. And one of the key things that comes right out at the start is sexual immorality. Almost invariably, this is one of the top things that occurs to people when they're living in the chaos phase. They get involved sexually with people they shouldn't. May be married, may not, doesn't matter, but they don't care whether the other person's married or not. They're just acting out of their own selfish instincts. Impurity, watching pornography, that's impurity. And debauchery. Debauchery means your life is out of control. You're just going to excess in things that are not good for you. But you don't just do it, you do it to excess. And it's harming you. And as you said, these things are obvious. You don't have to be an Einstein. You don't have to have a PhD in religious studies to know these things are wrong. You could be 10 years old and figure out these things are wrong. The question is whether they're going to control you or not. That's the question. Idolatry and witchcraft, hatred, discord, jealousy, fits of rage, selfish ambition, dissensions, and factions. Perhaps the root sin behind all sin is idolatry. Who's number one in your life? That's your God. For many people in this phase one of chaos, they are the God of their life. I'm God. I decide what I do, when I do it, or whether I do it, and it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. I'm worshiping me, and moi wants to do this. Moi doesn't want to do that. So what happens when you're living for yourself? Well, selfish ambition. It doesn't matter if it hurts other people. If you think it'll promote you, then you're all for it. Witchcraft. That may seem far removed. The Greek word is pharmakia, from which we get pharmacy. Witchcraft in the ancient world was associated with the use of illicit drugs that would move you into an altered state of reality. Boy, that's far removed from our society. We don't have anybody involved in pharmakia, do we, in our society? You know, most people, unfortunately, find that living in reality is just so unpleasant, they have to escape it. And they escape it through drugs, alcohol, and other things. But guess what? The next day when you wake up, you didn't escape anything. And now you find out what you did last night that wasn't good, and you have to live with that. Chaos creates chaos. Notice, hatreds, discord, jealousy. You know, it turns people against one another. Fits of rage, people are so angry. Dissensions and factions. Well, we're moving into what I call the silly season of the year, politics. And guess what? Every Democrat's a demon, according to Republicans. And every Republican's of the devil, according to the Democrats. They're the worst human beings on earth. I hope you're not one of those folks. Our society has got to the point so factious and so divisive. We should be identifying with basic, common things we all have in common instead of accentuating some differences and radical things of this or that sort. But it doesn't have to be politics. There's some people that just can't help themselves. They're always trying to stir one little group up against another. And nothing worse than being in a congregation where some people are talking behind other people's back. Oh, do you know so-and-so, so-and-so? Oh, we don't really like him or her, blah, blah, blah. Create a little faction. This is part of the chaos of sin when we don't let God control our attitudes and behaviors. And finally, an envy, drunkenness, and orgies and the like. In other words, he's not trying to exhaust the list. You know, the other stuff like this. But these things are obviously wrong. Nobody, your 5-year-old can figure out these things are wrong. It's not a matter that they're wrong. It's that people do them and have lost control of their life. And unless they let God intervene in their life, they're going to be stuck continuing the same bad behaviors from now on. But I warn you, Paul says, as I did before, that those who live like this will not inherit the kingdom of God. You can do your own thing, but when you die, you have to experience the consequences, and it won't be being part of God's eternal kingdom. You're going to be lost forever. So live it up, I guess, now, even though living up is becoming more painful every day that you do it, harming more people. But unless you let God intervene in your life and change things, you're lost in this life, miserable and unhappy and all you have to look forward to is eternal fire. Boy, that's a great thing. You know, put that on a poster and sell that. But that's the reality. Not the story, oh, we're living up, having a big time. When I was living that kind of lifestyle, everybody all week talked about what fun they had at the party on the weekend. But as I remember it, it wasn't all that much fun. But we pretended it was, and we couldn't wait till the next weekend. We're going to do that again. But when I was there, I was just kind of empty. But you see, living it up without living for God is simply dying it up, not living it up. So, the first stage we all start at is the chaos phase. And I don't care whether you're 15 or 54, a lot of people never got successfully out of stage phase one. They may have made some moves to conformity, but they keep falling off the wagon back into chaos. Only God, if we listen to him, Cain wasn't willing to listen. But if we listen to God and do what God tells us to do, the term in the Bible, redemption, that's a term for paying a ransom to set a slave free. That's what Jesus has done at the cross. What he has done can set us free of whatever controls us that's not God, and then give us a gift of his Spirit that helps empower us to live a life of love and truth. But apart from God, you are going to find yourself in more and more chaos. Phase one, a painful place to be. A place you can't get out of on your own, that takes God's divine intervention to save you from yourself. Do you realize the primary salvation of God is saving you from yourself? The foolish decisions you've made, the pattern of practices and behaviors you've engaged in, he's trying to save us from ourselves so we don't have to experience alienation from God for all eternity. Chaos. We all know what it's like. My grandmother used to call it going over Fool's Hill. So, everybody goes over Fool's Hill. Some start earlier than others, and some take a longer time on the trip before they realize it's a fool's endeavor. Sounded like fun, but it's not any fun anymore. And now, how do I quit this? And I can't on my own. And then I find myself in desperate need of divine intervention. Praise be to God, he has intervened. And there is a way out into the next step of faith development, into conformity stage, where I learn to conform my will to the will of God. And I find stability, peace, joy. You know, the things I thought I was going to get doing my own thing but didn't work out, they're all in Christ. But I have to make a decision, seek God's help and the help of my brothers and sisters to break out of sin's control and to break out of the chaos stage of faith into the conformity. Next week, we'll look at another biblical character also caught up in chaos, seeking to escape it, who eventually does. We don't get any impression from the Bible that Cain and even his relatives after him came back to God. They seemed to just keep wandering further and further. You see, the bad thing is this. If you decide to be selfish and sinful, well, that costs you your own soul. But your influence may cost your kids and your kids' kids and your great-great-grandkids, all of them to go down the same road because you set a pattern and they're following. So you are bringing a curse on your family by choosing to live a selfish and sinful life. But praise be to God, as Paul later said in Romans 7, praise be to God, he has intervened for us. Let's go to the Father in prayer. Loving Father and gracious God, help us to understand the reality of life, how easy it is to fall under the control of sin and Satan, how difficult it is to break free, and how much we need you to set us free and to give us real life. For that, we are grateful, for you did it through your Son, and it's in his name we pray.